Good morning. Welcome to this session on collecting information, writing up the information and referencing for essay writing. The written assignment is one of the major ways in which a student is going to be assessed at university level, and there are many reasons for this. For one reason, assignment writing prepares the student for many of the important aspects of life and work, including researching and analysing, gathering information and drawing conclusions, considering the evidence and evaluating the material that you gather, and then communicating and applying this information and sharing it with others. And in this session, we're going to consider some of the major steps involved in collecting the information and writing it up and referencing it when writing a good and effective assignment. First of all, before you begin, it's important to consider the task that you've been set. It's important to consider all the information too that you've been given for the assignment and for the subject. And you'll find information about the assignment requirements in the essay question itself and in the unit outline and other subject materials that you've been given. And so I encourage you to write out the essay question, to look at the different words that are used in the essay question, the different parts of the essay question, and to repeatedly go over the essay question a few times in order to examine and analyse what has been given to you in the task. And over the next 2 or 3 days, I encourage you to go back to the essay question and to read it again and again, because you'll get fresh insights into what is required in answering the essay question and why you should be answering it in certain ways. As you look at the essay question, you should look at the topic words that have been used to describe the task that you've been set and how it can be done. You should look at the direction words that tell you what you're expected to do with this topic. And you should also look at focus words that limit your topic to specific areas. You can't do everything on the topic, and within your subject, you're going to have a particular area that you'll focus on in detail. It's a good idea to write down some of the information that you have about the essay question, other information that you've been given by the lecturer in this subject, to ensure that you keep focused on the aims of the subject and the assignment. And spending some time on the analysis of the essay question and task at the beginning can save you a lot of time and heartache later on, particularly if you're not considering all the directions that you have been given. And as you start to gather information, there'll be times when you'll find other insights and information that aren't quite so related to the task, but are very, very interesting. I encourage you just to write down the web address or write down the idea, and you can come back to that later. Keep focused on the essay that you're looking at as long as you can and as much as you can. And you should also consider the details that you've been given about the subject and its objectives, the information that you've been given about the subject in class and online. And that way you can keep focused on what the lecturer is looking for in this particular subject. You've got to leave the other interesting areas that you love to explore to another time and place, but you can make a note of that in a journal that you keep. One of the biggest challenges is overcoming procrastination right at the beginning. And we all have times when we feel like putting off difficult tasks, such as a phone call or a visit or essay writing. However, putting that task off doesn't make the task go away or become any easier. Often, putting a task off can make it harder to start. So I encourage you, make a start. And the best advice is to just start. And as you begin to work on it, your interest will grow and your knowledge and understanding and confidence of the subject start. It can be the same with swimming or cycling. It's only when you start and get into it that you start to get your confidence in what you're doing. Starting early can also be very helpful. It avoids the danger that you can become too busy and things can crop up later on. And also starting early gives you extra time to gather the material and to reference and research your material, to check your material, and to edit the material. And some students have told me that they find it useful if you put 50% of your time into editing and redrafting and rewriting to show that you master and understand the material, rather than spending 95% of your time gathering and only 5% editing and putting it together. Leave sufficient time for editing by starting early. And for example, if you're putting aside 7 days to complete an assignment, that you might want to put aside 3 or so days to editing, rewriting, redrafting, reworking the assignment so that you communicate a sense that you understand what you are researching and writing about rather than just gathering some information about the topic. Remember too, not to get too stressed on the whole task. That is, don't work up a sense of being stressed about it and the difficulty. Just systematically make a start, work through the task that you've been given, gather the information, and it'll become clearer and clearer over time that you are understanding the task and that you're in control of what you've been asked to do. Many of us feel nervous at the beginning of an assignment writing task until we get into it and become familiar with the material. Don't overthink the problems and the difficulties. As with many experiences and skill developments in life, the confidence and interest will grow over time as the student explores the material that's available to them. And if you work slowly and steadily at the assignment task, initially gathering the information, reading through it, making notes yourself, then knowledge and confidence will grow over time. And so often the first task is to go to the library website or to go to Google Scholar and to gather resources. And particularly I encourage you to go to the reference list that you have been given for your subject and for the assignment, and to even Google the names of the scholars whose names you've been given and the topics associated with those scholars in the references and reference lists that you've been given. Gather that information, research the information, find out more about the topic, get excited and interested in the topic as you research it. And remember, don't panic. If you keep moving forward towards the goal, eventually you'll produce a quality assignment that you can be proud of. Often when you begin, it can be useful to write down a plan, and it doesn't matter if this plan changes over time. You might write down a brief dummy introduction that you can rework later, and then you might write down your goals, and you might write down some of the key thoughts and ideas you're working with. You can rework all of this later as you gather the information, but it'll give you an idea as to where you're going. And you can also write down the timeline of the dates where you'd like to complete some of your writing by, and try and complete your work a few days before it's due in so that you're ready if something goes wrong. Be ready, back up as you go along so that you've got material to work with if something goes wrong. When it comes to the writing process, you should familiarise yourself with the conventions of writing for the subject and task that you've been set. And so in biblical studies, which I teach, there's exegesis, where there are guidelines about gathering background information about the subject. In other subjects, there are guidelines as to how the material is put together. But in every subject, there are general guidelines as to how to put together paragraphs with a topic sentence at the beginning of the paragraph, and then evidence considered through the paragraph, and references to scholars through the paragraph that you've consulted as you've gathered the information. And then at the end of your assignment, all of the references will be laid out in alphabetical order to show the material that you've used in your assignment. There's conventions that are used, and you should become familiar with these conventions, and you'll be able to find examples of writing in the reading that you were doing. That'll familiarize yourself even more with the material that would be used and how it's to be used in writing an assignment. Think too about the structure of the assignment, that you'll have an introduction at the beginning and a conclusion at the end that draws it all together. And often you'll rewrite the introduction after you've worked through your assignment, written out the paragraphs, gathered the information. And so it's a good idea to rework the introduction at the end of doing your assignment work so that you fully understand what you're introducing. And the conclusion too, you can read through your whole assignment, gather together notes on what are the major points you're making in the assignment, and then you can use this in the conclusion as you write it up at the end. Essays don't usually have headings or subheadings, so if you're wanting to include those, then check with your lecturer. They're also not written so much in a preachy first person, I think that style, but rather in a more neutral, objective, formal, balanced style that says some people hold a view that this is the way we should look at things, and other scholars consider alternative evidence that points to another way of looking at things. And having compared three different ways of looking at the topic, this essay argues that the evidence points towards a conclusion, and then you outline the conclusion. So a scholarly analytical approach looks at the evidence, lays it out, compares a range of viewpoints, and often strengthened by considering a wider range of viewpoints before drawing a conclusion based on the evidence. Some students, of course, will conclude that they can't make a conclusion. That's probably not as strong as an assignment that says, having weighed up the evidence, it points to the following conclusion, and they lay out a conclusion that they're pointing towards. The introduction and conclusion don't have to be written when you start. They can be worked through at the end, and they can bookend the assignment. They can have a similarity to them in that one will introduce the major ideas that you're going to look at in the assignment, and then the conclusion will look in a similar manner to how these ideas have been examined in the assignment. Remember to aim for clarity in your written expression, and often as you read or attend lectures, you'll come across big words, specialised, less well-known terms. You shouldn't use them simply to show that you've gathered these words together. You should seek to understand these terms, and using your computer, you can Google the meaning of the terms, think through the meaning of the terms, rewrite the terms in various ways, but don't overburden your assignment with big words that are hard to understand. Seek to communicate clearly the ideas that these huge terms communicate. And remember, you can quote scholars directly. You must always show where these quotations come from. You can paraphrase in your own words, not just by moving a few words around, by thinking through what has been said and then expressing that in your own words. And then you should include some of your own insights that you have developed as you've read, and you should express these in your own words. You should seek to demonstrate an understanding of the topic, of the issues, of the evidence in your own words, and you should include a critical analysis that questions what is said, that asks who, what, where, when, why, how the evidence is presented and how it can be evaluated. Remember, in doing the research to complete the assignment well, you'll need to find the best and most relevant and up-to-date scholarly materials and information to use in your writing. So do go to the library website, of the library itself, gather the material, read through it, take notes, go to the databases and the catalogues and the digital resources, gather the information, lay it out, and then you can shift this around for the various sections of your assignment. You can investigate and research them further. And as you gather your resources, you'll then begin to refine the ideas that you're discovering. And your initial plan, your initial ideas, what you thought initially was correct, maybe turn around many times in many different ways as you reorganize, change, delete, and resequence the ideas. And some of the ideas that you find aren't so relevant or central, you may cut and paste them into another file and keep them aside for another time. Any material that isn't related to your main topic, you should also cut out and place it in a separate file for later study. And you should focus more and more on more deeply investigating the particular topic area that you are looking at. Don't forget to include reference details of author, name, resource, page number, all the bibliographical details that'll help you to locate this later, including a URL of websites. And this will help you to go back and find the information later if you need it. And it'll also be essential for the final finished assignment as you put the reference list at the end. Remember again, leave enough time for going through and editing your work and checking that all the references in your assignment match the references in your reference list at the end. All the references in your reference list at the end match the references that you have in your assignment. So when you're writing up your first draft of your assignment, you will gather the information, you'll place it in the approximate place and paragraph through the assignment. And then as you rework it, you'll begin to build the paragraphs and build the information there. And repeated writing each day will help you to overcome a writer's block or procrastination and help you to continue to develop the material in ways that will become more and more pleasing over time. One way to start writing is to expand on the draft points that you make in your initial plan. Another way is to start by beginning to gather the ideas from scholarly sources and to summarize them. And usually the assignment will require a combination of insights from others, from the gathered your resources, and also from yourself as you think through your own ideas. But remember, many of the scholarly resources put in years and years of study, whereas you may only have weeks and weeks of understanding. So you'll have to humbly rework your own material as you align it with the scholarly material that you gather. I encourage free writing. Often it's a good idea to just write freely about the topic on a regular basis each day, particularly after you've been reading about the subject and you've given time for it to settle in your mind. Don't worry about the word count at this point. Actually, it can be good, beneficial if you, at the end point, cut out 2/3 of your words and put them elsewhere and keep the very best of your writing. It's important to get your ideas flowing on the page at an early stage, and this will often require repetition, going through material, and you'll discover that sometimes you'll say the same thing 2, 3, 4 or more times, and you can edit that out at a later stage in the rewriting phase. Don't get too stressed about that early on. It's the getting the material down on paper, it's the developing your writing that are primarily the most important. The polishing can come later. And rereading the paper a day or two or more later will help you then review the paper and view the paper with fresh perspectives and fresh eyes so that you're able to more easily identify the ways to improve the essay. So remember, editing is important. It's always important to leave time for redrafting the paper, and many students, as we said before, will say the same amount of time is needed for the editing as for the initial draft. It's the editing that will enable you to move the sections around so they make more sense, so they flow together, so that there's one flowing overall argument from the beginning to the conclusion, and so that all the similar material is dealt with in the same place and that sections that are unrelated are removed. Further redrafting will present an opportunity a day or so later to further shape and cut and add to and finally polish your writing, and to balance it, add material where there's not enough information, cut out material where there's too much information on one particular topic. And then there'll come the opportunity to more further and finally rework the written expression for clarity, words, grammar, and referencing. And so it's going to be important to consider making the question central, showing that you clearly understand, you clearly introduce it at the beginning, and that you clearly draw it together at the end. And then as you're reworking the assignment, check that you are within 10% of the word length. And sometimes you'll have to cut material out, other times you'll have to add material. But it's never lost. You can save that in another file. In the final editing stage, check for typo mistakes, spelling and grammatical errors. Perhaps you might get someone else to read through it and to spot those mistakes, and you can learn from the corrections that they identify. Often another pair of eyes can be very helpful. Check the formatting, the line spacing, the page breaks, the font consistency, and where headings are required, check the headings. It's important too to keep an eye on the due date at every stage of the writing process. Make sure that you complete well before the due date, and be careful that you don't get the due date wrong, as can happen. Problems can also arise, like computer breakdowns, so be ready for that. Be ready so that if you got sick, you'd still have material completed, and if you did get sick, you'd get a doctor's certificate. Remember too, importantly, to reference, to demonstrate that you've gathered the best resources and evidence, and referencing will show a capacity to locate strong scholarly resources that can be used in study and evaluating the topic. The evidence, support, and theories from well-chosen scholars show that your ideas have merit because there's others who support them with similar evidence to that which you identify. It shows too that you're open to discussion, to interaction with other scholars who have looked at and examined the topic that you're examining. It shows that you're growing as a professional who can examine the material, evaluate it, and draw conclusions that are well supported, and that you will be a skilled professional who will be valued in the workplace. So it's important to be able to gather the material, to acknowledge where it comes from, to be familiar with the systems that are used in essay assignment writing. So I encourage you, if you develop these skills, if you put in the time, you'll not only do well, you'll improve your skills at thinking, gathering information, evaluating the sources of information, to weighing up the different evidence, and to developing your capacity for communicating. These are skills that will be in demand, and these are skills that will help you in life and in further study and in work opportunities that are ahead of you. Thank you. I'm Sam Hay, and I've appreciated this opportunity to share this class with you. Thank you.